to begin with a distinguished colleague of Professor Stephen Marks at Harvard, Professor Joseph Nye. He's always been a trend spotter and a trailblazer in terms of telling us what's happening, but through generalizations. So he's talking now about two power shifts that are happening simultaneously in the world. The first one is from west to east, something that's been written about. It is a statist discourse. The argument is that China and India, to a certain extent, are rising, and therefore there is a power shift from west to east while Europe is in terminal decline. So that's one. But Nye points to another power shift, which he calls the one from states to non-state actors. And he says that this is a bigger challenge in the longer run because it's occurring both in the domestic sphere as well as in the transnational space across the world. And he cites the example of the recent Arab Spring in the Middle East as an instance where people and non-state actors especially find themselves empowered to overthrow oppressive regimes. So this dual power shift means that we cannot understand today's world and we cannot frame academic discourses without acknowledging the power of non-state actors. But then we need to, of course, variegate what we mean by non-state actors. As has been mentioned, civil society, which is a construct of the 20th century, has often positioned itself as a third force, distinct from state and business and corporates. Right? So the idea is that it's an independent force. Although people on the left, especially theoreticians like Antonio Gramsci, have criticized the notion of civil society as a bourgeois space, as a bourgeois construct, what is important is that businesses have been dominating the era of globalization, but so have civil society actors, by which we usually tend to associate activist citizens and voluntary organizations that are advocating for in the name of the people. So you have a lot of anti-globalization, anti-corporate civil society activism, which highlights many of the excesses, malfeasance, abuse of human rights, and accountability problems in corporates. So in this scenario, it's easy to understand why CSR emerged in this scenario, where there are lots of non-state actors who are using the liberal democratic space to agitate and to point to major flaws in the corporate sector. So in many ways, CSR has been a defensive concept that arose out of the fear of being castigated, not by the law as much as in the public eye through the civil society organizations. So the academia has to catch up with these developments. And one proposal I have is that we need to have a business in society approach rather than simply business management studies in universities. So who are the consumers, who are the workers, who are the distributors, who are the marketers, who are the non-consumers, as one of the panelists spoke earlier, who are the bulk of society. They do not exist in vacuum as economic functionaries. They are important sections of society who may play assigned economic roles at specific junctures, but also thinking and acting human beings thrown into a wider society. So what academic institutions will have to do to acknowledge the rise of non-state actors, civil society, business and society paradigms is think about often specialized degree programs. For example, how about an MBA or an MA in corporate social responsibility? I don't think that's yet been attempted. Right? The old notion of MBA students specializing in personnel management is there, but I think it needs to be widened to say, an MBA in social relations. And for that, they will have to move out of the comfort zone of economics and applied economics, and also study sociology, and also study political science. This has to be integrated into curricula, and it's very important. People have spoken about training the corporate leaders of tomorrow to be more sensitive, and I think sociology and political science are an absolute must. In scholarly research, we also have to transcend gross generalizations about whether business is harming society or whether it's beneficial to society. This is important because, as we know, the polarization has happened because of a widespread tendency to label business either as anti-society or as working in social interest. Carl Polanyi, the great economists of the 20th century, who wrote The Great Transformation, coined a very beautiful phrase called social interests, which are different from individual interests, different from institutional interests. And social interests he defines generally as an amalgam of different stakeholders, all of whom need to survive, need to grow, and need to pass on to the next generation. Right? So how can academia promote this concept of CSR, which is often has been overused and has become cliche, into promoting social interests and social relations? This is going to be critical, but there is a hitch in this. Has academia been penetrated by business interests and funding with profit at any cost ideologies? It's already been mentioned here. Are we going to shape up more and more Rajat Guptas? And I hope you know what I mean. This gentleman has been implicated in the gallium insider trading scandal in the US, and he's a leading light in the Indian School of Business, as well as former director of Goldman Sachs. Right? Here was this bright thinking individual who was like cream of business schools and who was himself at the lead of a major business school in this country. So this cannot be allowed. We have to think about how education institutions have to have a balance between right, left, and center, all represented in the mix of faculty and students. And secondly, we have to avoid what I call the tyranny in campuses where only one school of thought prevails. Professor Marx is here and he can testify to the fact that the very best universities in the world, which of course he represents, has all shades on their faculty and student body. So that is how we can handle the question of business and society in a more impartial manner, instead of making blanket judgments. There's been a lot of debate since the financial crisis about whether the financial sector harms society or benefits it. Economists like Simon Johnson of MIT have actually disputed, in fact, making back of envelope calculations as to whether the financial sector benefits society or its net impact is actually harmful. So these kind of things, sector by sector, case by case, is what I think is going to help us, rather than coming up with blanket accusations of the entire corporate sector as and demonizing them as abusers of human rights, or having the opposite view, which is that they are angelic and that they are spreading wealth, and eventually it is going to lift up all the boats. So some people have spoken of the middle ground, and I of course will always advocate for the same, but academia, I would say, has a special role and a responsibility in this era where non-state actors are on the ascendant. Thank you.
I have a question for both Professor Kajur and maybe Dr. Chaulia as well. I think one of the major challenges which I would like to hear from you how to respond, taking up cue from the student from business school, is that we are indeed facing a huge dilemma, at least in India. That 20 years back, the state was dominant in almost all activity. And we obviously realized that that's not a good idea. And if you look at every sector, we opened up slowly. An example, telecom is a very interesting sector. When I was growing up, like many of us in that generation, you couldn't get a telephone connection until you know an MP or a minister, and going to a railway station is a nightmare to get a ticket. And two things really happened: one, privatization, and of course use of technology. And these two really opened up these sectors, and actually costs reduced in these sectors, competition increased efficiency, and you have a situation whereby things have become much more efficient. And now, my real question is, if we do recognize that private sector has an important role in huge areas of governance, the question really is, how do we we don't want to go to the stage where the state dominates. So in that context, what is the kind of role you envisage for the state? And how do we really truly see this balance without getting into a scenario where we are in some...
Professor Rajkumar's question. The two recent incidents, calamities in Japan, the Fukushima disaster and the oil well leakage of the Gulf of Mexico, both of these were clearly caused by failure of regulation and the coziness between the state authorities and corporations. So here what we need actually, I believe, is a state that is disentangled from these kind of toxic relationships. How do you do that? The only way is through sustained social pressure on the states, and therefore I go back to my presentation when I spoke about state in society, state in society. So that's the kind of approach we as academics should advocate for, where we talk about business in society and state in society, so that they are not disconnected from each other to the point that there is collusion that leads to criminal activity and nobody pays the price for it except the people.